Right, well, what I want to do tonight is introduce you to my world, which I call bug world, which is really a world of sex, violence, and a cast of billions. And the reason that I think it's very interesting and that we should all learn about insects is because there are lots of them, and they have a massive impact on our lives. I first got interested in insects when I was about, 5 or 6, and it was I was hooked from a very early age. Actually, I saw an Attenborough show long ago where he showed a male and female spider having sex. At the age of 6 or 8 or whoever it was, I was intrigued about the spider bit. I was also intrigued about the sex bit. So it was I was hooked from very early on. So let's start at the beginning, and this is, I'm sure, familiar to all of you. The age of the Earth is pretty spectacularly large, 4.6 billion years. So in this period here, about 500 million years ago, suddenly the oceans become full of interesting stuff, arthropods. Then about 400 million years ago, first plants, first algae on land, and the first arthropods creep out onto land. 300 million years ago, in this period here, when there were massive trees growing huge, swamp forests, insects were now flying. 100 million years ago, we have the appearance of the flowering plants and a huge radiation of insects on Earth. And here we are, this is early humans, hominins, walking across some wet ash in Africa and leaving behind their footprints. And humans like today, as we are, actually only have been around for about 200,000 years. So we really are a very strange animal indeed. And as I said, we are new kids on the block. So how did these creatures in the ocean become insects, and is that what would always happen? I suspect it is what would always happen. In the oceans, you can be a worm-like animal. You have to have a head and a tail, because otherwise you would just wander about in circles, head at the head end, tail at the tail end. And then gradually, if you begin to get legs and limbs and things develop here, you then get longer legs, and eventually it becomes more sensible to group these individual segments into groups. So in the sort of insect, and then this took 200 million years. So it's a long time. I mean, which actually you can do a huge amount in that time. An eye is easily able to evolve from a flat cell plate in about 100 million years easily. So this is a doddle. So basically, your insect now has 3 major groups. So all these things have become grouped as a head. Then you get these grouped as a thorax, which is the sort of engine room of the insect. And then all the rest are the abdomen. And of course, here you would have wings as well. So it's pretty easy to see how insects would arise. Well, how much do we know about the organisms with which we share this little speck of grit orbiting at the unfashionable end of the Milky Way? Well, we've described about 1.5 million species of everything. And of those, about 14% are plants, about 4% are fungi, about 2% are algae, and then you get this very interesting little group called the vertebrates. This is everything with a backbone. This is everything from aardvarks to zebras, blue whales, cats, bats, mammals, amphibians, reptiles, fish, dogs, us, birds, the lot. I mean, this is the sort of animal that most people get very excited about. They go, oh, it's a vertebrate. Oh, yes, we must look at that. And it's got fur and eyes and wings and marvelous. But actually, they're a pretty trivial group. So if we then go on to the next group, which I'm going to just lump together all the things which are sort of soft and squishy, which I know is not a good taxonomic grouping, but anyway, that makes up about 12%. But the remainder, and this is why I am passionate about arthropods, is arthropods. It's insects, crustaceans, spiders, that sort of stuff. Almost 66% of all species are in this major group. So if we are ever to have a spaceship arriving to see what we are all about, and they're not concerned with size, then they would report back to base that this Earth place is absolutely heaving with lots of generally small things with lots of legs. And that is the reality. So training as a biologist or a zoologist, if you don't know anything about insects or arthropods, you really don't know much about anything, really. So they are the most successful multi-cellular organisms on Earth. There's something like 18 quintillion insects alive at any time. This is a huge estimate, of course, which is about 2 billion individual insects for every human alive. Works out at about 40 metric tons of insects. So we have to ask ourselves the question, obviously, why are insects such successful animals? Why, above all others, have they come to basically be everywhere and do everything? Well, there are 5 factors in this winning formula which makes up arthropods and makes insects particularly, and that is they have a tough outside. So unlike us who have bones on the inside, they have their cuticle, their hard parts on the outside. They have a very efficient nervous system indeed. They are generally small-sized. They can fly, which is a great trick, and they flew, of course, millions of years before birds and bats did. And they breed like stink. That's the key thing here. So that's the 5 major factors why the Earth is composed largely of insects. So let's take the first one, and I'm always amazed on every trip I go at the variety, the form of insects, the textures, the colors. It's almost infinite. So it's the outside part of insects, of arthropods, is tough, but it can be very tough, or it can be soft, it can be hairy, it can be smooth, it can be any color or texture you want. It's basically, evolution will make an insect look whatever way it ought to look. And it's a polymer, which is interesting. And it's all produced by a layer of cells here. So on the outside of any insect is a single layer of cells which secretes all this stuff, which hardens. The outer part is harder than the inner part, and they've got these glands which ooze up wax, which comes out on the outside and makes them waterproof. There's a problem, of course, with having your hard bits on the outside. As you grow, of course, you can't just expand it, so you do have to split it and grow a new one underneath. So at some point, every so often, this breaks down, all this stuff here breaks down, and underneath the old skin, this cell layer secretes a new skin, which is wrinkled like this, because, of course, when you break out of your old skin, you want to be able to expand a bit and stretch out that new skin so that you're bigger. They have a very efficient nervous system, which is a thing that is often missed in books, oddly. The CNS of insects is much like ours in a way. It has a brain up here. It has a twin cord of nerves which goes down the underside like this, and every so often there's a tiny brain, if you like, all the way down. But the whole of insects, the whole of the inside of an insect or an arthropod is fluid-filled. It's like a bag of fluid. So if your wiring is bare, then it's not going to work terribly well. So the CNS, a bit like ours, is sleeved. So if we were to hack through the CNS, say through one of these small brains here, so we just hack it through there, you'll see it's surrounded, it's sleeved in these other cells, which makes it look very like any piece of wiring. It's got cells on the outside. And the edges of these cells bind very tightly indeed, like that, very tightly. So ions cannot pass from the outside, i.e. the sort of fluid-filled bit of the insect, into that tiny space beneath there, which is where all the axons are, where the nerves are. And it means that you can now invade just about any environment on Earth. I'm often asked, why are there so few insects in the sea? The sea is actually a very easy place to be. It's very easy as compared to dry, hot land. And the reason there aren't any insects is that insects have become so evolved for a land life that it would be hopeless for them to then reinvade. Some are, but it's all the bits of the sea where they could live are actually now occupied by other things, other arthropods. So it's a key thing, this, and it means that insects were able to colonize even the hottest, most arid areas. Now, the other key thing about insects is they tend to be small animals. Now, that thing there is an African insect. It's about the size of my hand. And it's a beetle, and it's got all the bits that insects should have. It's got a head, it's got a thorax, it has an abdomen, and on the thorax it's got 3 pairs of legs and 2 pairs of wings, and under there is the abdomen. And it's got a brain, it has a nervous system, digestive system, reproductive system, tracheal system, all the organ systems that insects require. And it might surprise you to look at that little spot, which actually is so indistinct on this screen. It's just there, there's a little red, there, little thing. That is the world's smallest beetle, okay? And it's exactly the same. It's got the same things as the large one. It's got a head, a thorax, an abdomen, 3 pairs of legs, 2 pairs of wings, a digestive system, a nervous system, a reproductive system, a tracheal system. It's just a lot smaller. And the interesting thing about insects, and particularly animal cells, is that animal cells tend to be the same size across lots of groups. So it isn't that these tiny insects have smaller cells, it's that they have fewer cells. And the question really is how few cells do you need to make a functioning insect with all the right bits that it has to have? Well, the answer is it can be very small indeed. And the smallest flying insect has a wingspan of about 1/4 of an mm across the wingtips. It's absolutely tiny. And I was in Africa once on a trip where I found what I thought was the world's smallest insect, and I gleefully returned it to Oxford in about 100 alcohol-filled tubes. I made the mistake of telling somebody in the press that I'd found the world's smallest insect, only to find when I got back from Heathrow, there was a TV van and several reporters in cars outside the museum wanting to see this thing. Of course, I couldn't find it because it was very small and in a tube of thousands of other insects, and I got the headline, "I found the world's smallest insect, oh dear, where is it?" Said Dr. McGavin, 87. No, yeah. So, being small is good. If you think about the environment, being small is particularly good because there's more places for you to live. If you're a large animal, an oak tree is just an oak tree, that's it. But an oak tree to an insect is a whole heap of places. It's a cathedral, if you like. So there are 452 species of insects who live in English oak because they're small and they can fit themselves in there very, very easily. Now, of course, 300 million years ago, insects were generally quite large. They were a lot larger than they are now. And some had absolutely enormous wingspans like this, I mean, huge. And you do have to ask yourself, as I have been asked, why could insects not become this big today? Why do we not have giant insects flying at us as we cycle along the road, clunk, hitting us off? Well, there are several reasons for this. One is oxygen. Now, because insects breathe through a system of basically air holes all the way along, which connect tubes like Hoover tubes, and they branch and branch and branch until the very finest of the tubes is lying in contact with a single cell. So oxygen diffuses through that system into the cell, and CO2 diffuses out. So it's a pretty slow process. It's not active. It can be helped a bit as they flap. But unlike us, it's a slowish, arrangement. So if you're very big and fat, oxygen is not going to get to the cells inside you in the sorts of volumes it ought to. But if we go back 300 million years ago, look at the concentration of oxygen. So when all these big forests were growing, the swamp forests, enormous amounts of trees that were dying and producing oxygen and growing again and all the rest of it, which then handed us all the coal and oil, which we are now blithely burning. But here is where oxygen is today. It's about 21%. But in the Carboniferous period, oxygen levels went through the roof, about 32%, they think. And by contrast, of course, CO2 was going down and down as it was being locked up in all the trees. So because there's a lot more oxygen, it means you can physically get larger because oxygen will be able to reach those cells much more easily than it can today. That's not the whole story, of course. One of the things that you can do to avoid being eaten by something else is to get larger. So if you're an insect wandering about and you don't want to get eaten by anything else, evolving a larger size with a harder outside is a good idea. So the things that eat you will evolve to be slightly bigger and tougher, and then so on, and you'll get bigger, and eventually you'll reach the point where you can't actually get much larger for various other reasons. And of course, at the end of this period here, the Permian, arose the reptiles, which could get a lot bigger. And then suddenly, being a fist-sized insect or larger wasn't such a terribly smart idea, because it was now, food for everything else. So insects became smaller. But there's something that you to understand the insect world, you really have to think yourself into the place of an insect. The world to insects is not the world that we inhabit. It's a very strange place indeed. And Haldane, this great scientist, in 1928 wrote this essay on being the right size. And it was also the same guy who said when when an interviewer asked him, Professor Haldane, what can be inferred of the creator by looking at the works of creation? And he said, an inordinate fondness for beetles. But he also said in this book, which I think is fantastic, you can drop a mouse down a 1,000-foot mine shaft, and arriving at the bottom, it gets a slight shock and walks away. A rat is killed, a man is broken, and a horse splashes. Now, I've been trying to get a TV company for the last 10 years to film me taking a mouse or a shrew up the Eiffel Tower or wherever it is, some high building, and going, and filming it all the way down, and it would hit the tarmac, get a slight shock, and walk away. A horse, there would probably be complaints about that, or a whale or something, that would be horrendous. And so you have to remember that there are certain things that you can't change. The force of gravity, the properties of water, temperature, that sort of thing. They're fixed. So the size you are is quite important. So here's a way of explaining it to you. So if you've got an insect or an animal with a height or length of 1, whatever it is, I don't care, the area of a single face will be 1 times 1, which is 1, and the volume of that animal roughly will be 1, because it's 1 times 1 times 1. So if we then scale that insect or animal up to 5 times taller or longer than the first one, the surface area of a face is now 25. The volume has gone up to 125. And if we just make the insect or the animal 10 times bigger, taller, or longer, the surface area of a single face is now 100, but the volume has gone up to 1,000 times. Now, this is going to have an enormous effect. So area increases by a square, whereas volume increases by a cube, okay? Essentially, it means that small animals have lots of outside for not much inside, and large animals have lots of inside, and therefore mass, for not much outside. Now, if I can have the house lights on a little minute, I can, if you're still not convinced about this, we just get the house lights up a little. There we are. So I've got a pea here, a garden pea, which is our smallish animal, okay? Got to throw it in the air here, and I missed the carpet, the bag completely. There we are. But you can see it's completely intact, unbroken, undamaged. That's better. Get it on there. A slightly larger animal, a grape. You get the point. Throw it up. Boing, intact. I'll just, yeah, intact. Yum. Right. Now you're going to regret being in the front row, aren't you? Yeah. Let's sit in the front row. No, not a good idea. If it gets in your trousers, okay, I'm not paying the bills. Right, okay. Ta-da! So, there we have a very injured animal. Now, I've got choke. Yeah, I've got a grape skin there. Now, that simple thing shows you why elephants don't jump, okay? You have never seen an elephant jump, ever, nor will you see an elephant jump. Even when elephants are in a hurry, they walk like this. They do not go, na-da, da-da, because they would break their legs. They just go, snap, okay? Also explains why angels can't fly, but that's by the by. Despite this, thank you, house lights down. Despite this singular fact, which controls all animals on Earth, human beings choose to ignore it completely in fiction. And some folks actually believe that animals could be this size. This is a card from the 40s in Ohio or the States somewhere where they were saying, gee, we got some grasshoppers here. They're so big, we got to shoot them with a shotgun. And everyone's going, oh, we better not go there. Oh, no. Great things in sci-fi films. This was them. These giant arthropods lived in the inside of the earth and broke out through a crack in the crust, and unbelievable. Here is a card from a series of cards. If anybody has this set, the complete set of 50 cards is now worth about £10,000. So yeah, if you have one, do tell me. So it's called Mars Attack, and it was based on this book where the Martians came to Earth and they had ray guns, and rather than injure us themselves, they simply used these ray guns to make the insects on Earth larger and commanded the insects to attack us. And so here's the giant flies, beheading everybody and flying about. And an insect this size could barely move. It would just sit there going. It certainly couldn't fly. That, of course, is, well, I won't even mention that one. But that one there, this book about these small humans, very popular, great film. And in the film, of course, it's full of mistakes. I mean, full of mistakes if you know anything about science, if you know anything about volumes and surface areas. So these small hominids, little tiny people about an inch high or whatever, were seen in the film abseiling down a curtain with a pin, and they had to escape a cat. So homily or pod, I can't remember which one it was, had some thread and a needle, and she stuck it in the curtain, and they abseiled down. They could jump onto the flagstone floor from the top of this building, and they would not be hurt. They would roll away and be gone. That would be it. And the cat would be going, oh, what happened there? But because the author of the book was quite a large person and would never dream in a million years of jumping from a bookcase onto the hard floor, she imagined that her creations would be similarly afflicted. Not so. So you really have to think yourself into the size of an insect. Well, of course, flight is one of the other key factors that has made insects such a successful group of organisms. They've been flying for a very long time, and were flying, as I say, millions of years before birds or bats. And probably one of the reasons that makes the beetles, which are the most species-rich insect order by far, in fact, to a first-order estimate, 1 animal in 3 in the world is a beetle. The reason that they have done so terribly well is that they've been able to split their wings into 2, i.e. the front wings become a protective hard case, which don't really help much in flight, a little bit, but not much. And the main flying job is done by the hind wings. Now, the world is your oyster because you're able to fold your fragile flying wings out of the way under these hard shells, and you can now go anywhere. You can go under rocks, into soil, into animals who've died. You can go anywhere you want. So that suddenly you are not restricted to flying about on things. You can now go into things and into anything. And that's probably the major reason why this particular insect group has done so very, very well. Now, of course, the old insects flew in a particular way. They had wings, and you would pull up a muscle here, and it would go down, and you'd pull a muscle here, and it would go up, and it would just go up and down like this, a bit like this. So that's the sort of old-style wings, if you like. And that's the sort of wings that evolved first. Fast, but not very fast, because the animals were quite big, and that's the sort of flying engine which you see in dragonflies. So they've got two pairs of wings, and the reason they're so hard to catch, actually, is because the front wings and the hind wings can fly out of phase, not always, but they can, so that sound that you hear as they fly is the rear end of the front wing hitting the front edge of the hind wing as they fly out of phase, like this. They can also fly forward with the wings on one side and backwards. I can't do it very well because I'm not a dragonfly, but they can fly backwards with the wings on the other side, a bit like if you're in a boat and you row forwards with the oars on one side, backwards with those, and you're able to rotate yourself in your own space, just like that. So these animals are fantastically agile. But as insects got smaller, you couldn't physically vibrate your wings fast enough, i.e. contraction, contraction, contraction. It just won't work. You have to devise a different engine. And that's what the majority of insects today have now. So rather than have a control attached to the base of the wings, contract, 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 like this, they basically change the shape of the box. So the wings are hinged onto the box, which is the thorax, and you simply squeeze the thorax, elongate it, squeeze it, elongate it, squeeze it. And because of the way the wings are hinged, they flip up and down like this, okay? Very elegant and able to achieve those fantastically high speeds that you require in a small winged animal. Now, flies, of course, I know, I mean, how many folks have hit a fly? I mean, I've hit 3 today, you know. I feel bad. I do feel bad. Because these are wonders of micro-engineering. They are fantastic. So the wing of a fly, and of course, flies have one pair of wings. The hind wings have become a little tiny stalk, which oscillates, which helps them to control where they are, up, down, sideways, or whatever. And the wings fly in a nice little H shape. So if a fly is just hovering, it'll fly like this with the wing going up and down, so there isn't any drive forward or backwards. It's just simply holding itself there. If it wants to fly forward, it just tilts the wing a little bit like this, and that figure of 8 then drives it forward. If it wants to go backwards, it just rotates it backwards, so it now flies backwards. So we're only just beginning to understand the elegance of these tiny machines. And recently, and in fact in the last 5 years, we've been able to actually image this in real time. This is a fantastic breakthrough. I had to learn all about this at school and by little models and drawings, and but to see it actually happening, well, what you need for this is a synchrotron. Marvelous thing, a synchrotron, and you can put a fly in it. It survives just long enough for you to see it flying. I know, it's terrible. It was Lord Clark who said, "It is chiefly through our instinct to kill that we have become familiar with the works of nature." So I'm afraid that's true, as it ever was. So here is the fly, anchored on, glued onto this thing, and you blow air in its face, and it flies as fast as it can. And then you can have a beam line here, and you can This is, I think, one of the most amazing pieces of film I've ever seen. So that's the head ought to be here, that's the abdomen here. We're now just looking at the thorax there, and you can see inside it, you can see the groups of muscles which pull the thorax in and out, up and down, and you can also see the tiny little groups here which tweak the wing, which just change the angle a little bit as it flies. This is unbelievable. So we're actually seeing inside a live fly as it's flying. Absolutely fantastic. Well, that's flight, and of course, if you can fly, you can go anywhere. You can avoid the vagaries of the environment. You can hunt for food much more easily, escape enemies, find mates, and it's about mates which we turn to now. So reproduction is the last final big 5 factors which makes insects such a successful group, and they breed for England, the world, Harry and St. George. They really do. This is a new species of fly which I found in Borneo on a trip, and I found them in copula, which is what flies do quite a bit of the time. So here is the female underneath. You can see her abdomen is full of eggs there, and there's the male, and he's engaged in the act of copulation, and he's holding her by the neck like this, Rob Titchener, where are you? This is how you do it. Yeah, sorry. All the Archers fans there, good. But it's amazing how many folks I speak to who go, sorry, an insect has a penis. I'm going, yes, of course they have a penis. How do you think they reproduce? Well, I had no idea. And you go, well, there you are. That is that little white thing there, which actually is very long indeed. It goes from somewhere in here to somewhere in here. That's the weevil's willy, if you like. And remarkable it is too. But it's not even the biggest in the arthropod world. The biggest male organ in the animal kingdom, size for size, weight for weight, or whatever, is also an arthropod. It's a barnacle. Now, of course, you have a very special problem if you are a barnacle, because you are stuck onto a rock. You're actually stuck down. That's it. You can't go anywhere. And if you want to mate with the barnacle over there, you can't just go, hello. So you must have an incredibly long penis, and it is actually called the groping penis. It's a great, textbooks have it, yes, the groping penis of the barnacle. And it's up to 18 times the length of the barnacle, which means effectively, if I was a barnacle, I could mate with the entire back row here without any trouble at all. You'd be going, no, get off. And the sexual world of insects, I think, is one of the most. There are so many tricks. There is everything. You think that human beings have cornered the market in unusual or deviant sexual behavior. No, you don't even know the half of it. And 2 instances which I particularly adore are these little flies, which you can find in most hedgerows in England, Mpd flies. And the male Mpd fly, this one here, in order to attract a female, has to give the female a gift, like a box of chocolates. It's exactly the same thing. It's like you buy a big box of chocolates and you hope at the end of the evening it's going to be all right. So here the male fly has offered the female fly a prey item, which is a small hopper in this case, and a smaller fly in this case. And while she feeds, distracted, he can then mate. A few of the males don't go to the effort of catching prey themselves. They will mug other males who have gone to the effort and will steal the prey off them and say, thanks very much, I'll take that, and they'll fly off and mate. Some of the flies make the gift look more attractive, so they wrap it in silk. It's a bit like you having your box of chocolates in a beautiful gift wrap with a bow on it. Looks fantastic, and it works exactly the same way in the fly world. So here's the gift all wrapped up in silk, looks fantastic, and as the female fly probes apart to eat her gift, he can mate for longer because it takes her longer to get into it. There are even some flies who use the silk gift wrap without putting anything in it. Now that's nasty. So it looks fantastic. It's beautifully wrapped up, completely empty, hollow gift. But the female will often accept it, and the male will mate, going, "This is empty. Too late. Too late." Fantastic. And then, of course, this fantastic tale of the fireflies in America. It would only happen in America, this. They aren't, of course, flies, and they aren't on fire. They are beetles, and they glow. And here is one called Photuris, which has got a large insect, and this is one called Photinus. Now, what happens here is the female of this species here, if she's feeling like she wants a mate, she will flash the signal of her own species and attract a mate. If she's just feeling hungry, she will imitate the flash of this one here. So in the darkness, this little hapless male sees the signal that tells him that just around the corner is love, and he's going. But it's not. It's a larger beetle who eats him. I mean, it's a tough world out there. So so that they are truly the femme fatale of the insect world. So she, according to whether she's feeling horny or hungry, she will regulate her, flashing. And we thought for a long time that that's all there was, to it. It was just a trick to get extra food, easier food. Well, it turns out, of course, there's more to it. And in the world of biology, there's always more to it. Even a system that we've looked at for 100, 200 years, you look closer, look deeper, you find there's something else in there that you hadn't realized. And in fact, it turns out that these beetles here, the ones that she eats, are not eaten by spiders as much because they have a peculiar taste. So by eating the male of this other one here, she acquires that peculiar taste and is avoided by spiders. Fantastic. So the reproductive output of flies or insects is truly stupendous. I mean, this is a new species of fruit fly, again, which I found in Borneo, and it's tiny. It really is a very small fly indeed. It could sit very, very comfortably on the head of a pin, and that's it. And if you had one pair of fruit flies and they were to reproduce at their maximum rate for 1 year, how many offspring would they have? All things being equal, i.e. there being infinite food and they're not going to die or be eaten by anything else, and they all reproduce at the maximum rate. Well, a female fruit fly can produce about 100 eggs at a time and can breed 20 times a year, say. So theoretically, the offspring of this female fly at the end of a year could be 1 times 10 to the power 41 flies, which looks like this, okay? So it's a truly huge amount of flies, in theory. Now, you might ask yourself, what would that look like? Would it fill this auditorium? Well, it would, and more besides. In fact, if you were to cram the fruit flies at about 60 per centimetre cubed, which is about right, without them being absolutely squashed, it would make a ball of flies that would just about fit between the Earth and the Sun. So it would just fit in there. That's just one fly. Now, of course, that potential reproductive output is similar in lots of other species of insect. And the reason we are not up to our armpits in insects, of course, is because they die of the weather conditions and diseases and pests. They eat each other and so on and so forth. Now, you might say to yourself, well, I'm still not convinced, but here is a very interesting tale, which I'm sure many of you have heard, but it shows you the general approach to this. This is about an old man and a king somewhere in Eastern Europe in the Middle Ages, and the king was very vain, and he said the old man had helped him in some minor way or other. I can't remember exactly what it was. And he said, all right, old man, you can have anything you want. I'm the king, you can have a reward, whatever you want, just ask it, I will give it. And the old man thought for a minute and said, well, I'll have a drafts board. And the king was incensed. He said, this is embarrassing, I'm the king. Of course I can give you a drafts board, goodness sake. He said, okay, I'll have a grain of wheat on the first square and 2 grains on the second square and 4 on the third, and so on, till you get to the end. And the king went, oh, this is embarrassing. Look, okay, well, if that's what you want, okay, fine, I agree, sign here. So, of course, what he hadn't done is calculated how much grain sits on the last square, which is quite a lot, because if you go home on your calculator and go times 2, times 2, times 2, 64 times, it looks like that. It's 9 million, hold on. 9 million grains of wheat or barley or rye or whatever it happens to be. And if you add that to the other grains that are now sitting on this very stacked grassboard, it comes to around about 340 billion metric tons, which at the time this tale was told was considerably more wheat than had ever been grown in the history of wheat growing, ever since wheat growing began. And the king was deposed and the old man became king. Hurrah! Okay, so if this happens to you, and I'm telling you this quite seriously, if anybody says to you, you can have whatever you want, it doesn't matter what country you're in, ask for a draftboard, and the smallest coin of that country, on 2 and 4 and 8, and make them sign it before they agree. And you'll be quite rich, I would imagine. And I want 5%. Okay. So that hopefully explains why insects have become such an incredibly big insect or animal group. Why are they important? Why should we care about insects? Why do I keep banging on about insects at every opportunity that comes up? Well, of course, they're incredibly useful. Their ecosystem services are unparalleled. They are the ones who hand us all the flowers and fruit, and without them we simply wouldn't have any pollination. It wouldn't happen. They eat each other and in large amounts. They recycle dung and carrion and all sorts of things. And more importantly than all of that, perhaps, is that they are actually food for most things. Most animals on Earth eat insects. All the birds, for instance. I mean, very few birds don't eat insects. So without insects as a food source, as a layer in that chain from sun's energy to plants to insects to carnivores and higher up the chain, you simply wouldn't have all these things. They're very useful if you're into research, if you want to do physiology or ecology or genetics or behaviour, any of these things. You don't have to work on large animals. Large animals are expensive. They breed slowly. You get the ALF blowing up your car on a Tuesday morning because you're working on furry animals or whatever. Animal cells are animal cells. They're pretty much the same, whether it's a cat or a cockroach. So they're incredibly useful things. But they do have a dark side, of course. Lots of insects are pests, and they also carry lots of diseases. So a few of those first. So if I said to you, plains of Africa, herbivores, you would be thinking about great heaving, snorting herds of wildebeest and gnu and giraffe all rampaging across the savannas, eating their fill. Well, yes, that's what I would probably have thought of originally. But in fact, the job of being a herbivore in the savannas of Africa is not done by the big hairy things who are taking actually a relatively small amount of green material. It's done by the beetles, the termites, the grasshoppers. They're taking away orders of magnitude more green material than anything else. In the New World, Amazon, for instance, insects are taking, one species of insect alone, an ant, is taking away about 1/5 of all of the green material in that area. One species. And if I said to you, carnivore and Africa, right? Hold that thought. Yes, you were thinking this. Who was not thinking about this? I see. Carnivore, lions. Do you know, it was a constant amazement to me why Wildcat Diary or Big Cat Diary was so popular. Lions don't do anything. It's like anybody who has a cat at home, you know what they do. They're just like lions. They sleep most of the day. They just lie around under a hedge or in your bed or somewhere. They get up and eat occasionally, and they fight occasionally. But basically, it's, that's it. And they had to edit literally countless thousands of hours of lions asleep to make half an hour of anything remotely interesting. But anyway, even as a job of being a carnivore, they fail miserably, because the real job of being a carnivore in any habitat, whether it's your back garden or the savannas of Africa or the rainforests, is done by insects. And in fact, ants alone are the major carnivores in any habitat. So 12,000 species of ants. Not all of them are carnivores, but heaps of them are. And they make up probably about 25% of the total biomass of animal flesh in any habitat. So we're beginning to get a picture now of how important these animals are. And of course, lots of insects eat each other internally. This was one of the things that caused Darwin such grief. He eventually decided that he couldn't believe in a caring God, because he made a quarter of creation solely to eat the other part of creation alive on the inside. And he thought, no, I can't believe this. It has to be evolution, must be right. And here are a range of insects being attacked variously, or here's one, a tiny wasp actually hatching out of a cocoon. So your chances of surviving to be an adult insect are actually relatively low. About 80% of all insects are attacked in some way by something else. So here is a tiny oak gall here growing on a leaf, and inside there is a little gall wasp, but here's a tiny wasp with a long egg-laying tube that can just reach down and sting you, and that's it over. And what will emerge from that gall is this. Here's an aphid which is being attacked by a tiny wasp, and what will emerge from this aphid isn't a larger aphid. It'll just go all brown and stuck onto the leaf, and eventually a tiny little hole will be hacked in the top of the aphid. It'll go ploop like that, and a wasp will fly out. And here is a fly larva inside a leaf here, eating away grub, going munch, 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 safe from all the enemies it thinks. It's bathed in its own food. Fantastic. But of course, there's a tiny wasp that will just feel the surface of the leaf to find out exactly where that grub is and sting it right through the head. But what's remarkably interesting is that this animation, cartoon idea of animals, the Bug's Life film, it was so inaccurate. Of course it was inaccurate, but anyway, this is what a bug's life really is. So here is Mr. and Mrs. They meet, they fall in love, they have some eggs, the eggs hatch, and they have little caterpillars. It's all going swimmingly. And then when they're about half grown, they're eating away, munch, munch, and they get a stab in the side, and it hurts. They go, oh, they twitch like this, oh, and then they in about half an hour, they're okay, and off they go again eating. But what's happened, of course, is that a tiny wasp has laid not one egg, perhaps 2, 3, 4, perhaps 10 eggs, perhaps 50 eggs, who knows, 100 eggs. And those larvae have now hatched inside this hemolymph-filled bag of organs, which is a caterpillar. But they don't want to kill it yet. The host has to live as long as it can, because they want lots of food. They want to get bigger, and if they kill the host straight away, they ain't going to survive. So they just avoid the heart, they avoid the nervous system, they avoid all the essential organs. It's incredible, and we still don't know how this happens. They eat all the fat tissues and the fluid. They just avoid eating something that will kill the host until the last hour of this animal's miserable life, when they go on an eating spree and just eat the whole thing from end to end. And what happens next, of course, is this. So here is the now empty skin of the host, and out popped, 30, 40, 50 of these wasps, who now spin a cocoon for themselves. And there is actually a smaller wasp that parasitizes these things. It's very small, but it then flies around, finds a collection of these and goes, yippee, and it'll go and sting every one of these. So what eventually hatches isn't the host or the wasp, the first wasp, it's the second wasp. It's a jungle out there. So insects are the food of the world. As I say, most birds eat insects. A swallow chick will eat 200,000 insects, a single chick. I mean, huge amount. A blue tit, a great tit chick brood, try saying that at home, a great tit chick brood will consume 120,000 caterpillars. So vast amounts of insect food. Now, for the last 20 years, we've all been saying, oh, there's a decline in farmland birds. We don't understand why that's happening. Well, I can tell you why it's happening. We are using vast amounts of pesticides. We are losing habitat faster than you can speak. And with that, you are losing huge amounts of insects. When I grew up in Edinburgh, this is Edinburgh, up in the frozen north, when I went out with my dad for a drive in June, we would come back and the front of the car would be caked in insects, literally caked. And you could buy special bug spray, with your Esso, bug be gone, and you spray it on the front and you just clean the car off. Nowadays, you can drive through Berkshire on a June afternoon. There's nothing, not a single insect you will find glued onto your headlamps. It's just because there are so few now. We have probably lost about a quarter of the volume of insects, if not more. That's why we have a decline in farmland birds. And of course, we would not have in the world things like aardvarks or anteaters or pangolins or bats. Even the smallest British bat, this is a tiny little thing, has to eat something like 5,000 or 6,000 small insects a night. Otherwise, it'll die. So insects are really the food of the world, and of course we eat them as well. I taught Heston how to cook insects. I just thought I'd tell you that. I'm responsible for part of his insanity. Don't record this. All right. But 100 million years ago, the world was a very dull place. It was brown and green. Jurassic Park. How many people saw flowers in Jurassic Park? They shouldn't have been there. Aha, because they hadn't evolved yet. But quite suddenly, the world was just about to become a very colourful place. Co-evolving with the flowers were insects, and particularly bees, that had evolved to basically act as some books call it, flying genitalia. So the bees basically fly from flower to flower, transferring pollen, and it works extremely well. And today we have something like 20,000 species of bees in the world. In the UK, you might think how many there are, I don't know, 20, 40, 80, 100. There are 246 species of bee in the UK. Some are rare, some are on the way out, of course. But anyway, without bees, they are responsible for 75% of the 80 or so major world crops. That's not, of course, grasses, which are pollinated by wind. So if we hadn't got bees, we wouldn't have any of this stuff. We'd have no vegetables, no fruit. We'd have no chocolate. We would have to survive on a diet of wheat or grains and fish. That's if there were any fish left, of course. But of course, as I said, insects have their bad side, and about 1/6 of all the crops grown in the world are eaten by insects. That, of course, is why they say we have to produce billions of tons of pesticide. And some of these insects are extremely bad indeed. This particular one is a scourge across 60 countries in the world, from West Africa right the way across to India. Interestingly, in every country where it swarms, it is collected and eaten as food, but by us. But anyway, here is a short clip of a film which just shows you a major swarm, which may contain something like 50 billion individual insects, each weighing about 2 grams. So you can do a quick calculation on that. But they are eating 4 times as much food in a day as all the human inhabitants of New York, say. A colossal amount of food. And it's a problem, which we have to address. There is research now underway. We now know why they swarm, and we might be able to unpick that, because they're only a problem when they swarm. But anyway, that's a wee bit off, I suspect, in the future. Also, 1 person in 6, and generally the same 1 person in 6 who hasn't got enough to eat, and 1 billion of us today are underfed, whereas 1 billion of us are overfed. But these insects also affect individuals by acting as vectors for various illnesses, and malaria alone kills up to 3 million people a year, mainly children in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is a group of small kids I knew in East Africa when I was there for about 4 years, and I know for a fact that that boy died, as did that boy, in the last few years of malaria. So it's a big issue, and there are other diseases, of course. So when you complain about it being cold and wet in the UK, not today, obviously, it's very warm today, but there are lots of other things around the world which have quite a huge impact. River blindness, sleeping sickness, etc., plague, typhus. And actually on the subject of plague, one of my favorite tales, of course, and this is one of the great instances how insects have changed the world, have actually changed the course of history. In 1347, a great plague, of course, swept across the whole of Europe, Black Death, whatever it was called. They call it bringing hysteria and death. And of course, the thing that was really superb, well, I see superb about it, was that it changed lots of things. It changed our view of the church. It changed the way you worked. It meant that if you survived the plague as a working man, you could suddenly say to your boss or your owner or your wherever it was, say, look, mate, if you want me to work for you, you're going to have to pay me a bit more. And of course, there wasn't any option. There were so few individuals around who could work. It changed the whole structure. Everybody prayed to the church, oh, help us, save us from this pestilence. Well, yes, we would, but unfortunately, we're all dying of it as well, so it's a bit of a problem, really. So it really did change in a dramatic way the whole of the world. And of course, we are a war. We like war. Human beings have been at war for millennia. But in fact, more people have died of insect-borne illnesses in the history of human warfare than have ever been shot, stabbed, or blown up. Up until World War II, when this guy had the brilliant idea of this pesticide, which could kill lice. And suddenly, after that, we were able to kill ourselves much more efficiently than had hitherto been the case. So that's an interesting point. Well, there are lots of things that we can find out about insects, and we're finding out about them all the time. How to make things small and fly, how to collect fog out the atmosphere, how to hack through soft flesh without it being either frozen or fixed. All of these things are up for grabs. But this is a problem I have, and it's a problem I have constantly in my new career on the TV, is when I put on that slide, you're all looking at that. I know you are. You can't help yourself. I can't help it either. You go, oh, it's so cute. But in actual fact, these animals are pretty useless, both in terms of what they do and their impact on us. So useless. Cute, big eyes, hands, smiles, the whole fur, the whole bit. But really, bees are much more important, wasps are much more important, mosquitoes are more important, beetles, flies. There's only one insect on this image which we could do without, and we could remove. So this is it, the head louse, only found on us, on our hair, eats our blood, hangs on the whole of the cycle, the egg, the nymphs, the adults are on our hair, that's it, and that's where they live. So there are now 7 billion phones in the world and 7 billion humans in the world. So if we could spread out the phones and agree that next Tuesday would be Global Head Louse Day, we could ring everybody up and say, right, text, kill the head lice now. You could shave your head or kill all the head lice, and in 24 hours we could extirpate one species from the surface of the earth. And it would probably have no impact whatsoever. But yet we are blithely killing millions and millions of other things without even a second thought. We're a very strange animal. We are now looking at the infinitesimally small, the bits that make up atoms, and even smaller. We're, a huge cost. We're looking into space as far as has ever been looked. We're able to image the afterglow of the Big Bang. All of this is fantastic stuff and expensive. But I'm afraid it doesn't actually do what I think we should be doing, which is looking at the support system that we have. This is the only place, as far as we know, where life like us has evolved. This is our speck of dirt, and we're not looking after it very well. So these forests, these huge forests, 3 swathes of them, now only cover 6% of the land surface area from about 14%, and it's on the way down. And we're pretty sure these forests contain between 60 and 80% of all species on Earth. So in the time it takes for an acorn to grow into a mature oak tree, this could all be gone. So I was born in 54. Borneo looked like that. And now, as we just scroll through 85, 2000, 2005, by 2020, which is just around the corner, most of the available forest in Borneo, the second largest island on Earth, could be gone. Well, there might be a hope, a way out, of course. This is why it's happening, of course. 1750, they build Westminster Bridge. And they also realize here that our Milky Way is a flat sort of, a spinning plate of stars. Anyway, things go on and they go up and up and up and up. I was born about here, so about 2.5 billion, and we're now up to 7 billion. In fact, we're up here. We're up about 7.2 billion. The growth rate is slowing, but it still means we're going to be having 9.5 or 10.9 billion in a very short time. Well, what can we do? People are now thinking about this seriously. About 25 years ago, a group of engineers and scientists and friends decided to make a biosphere, that they would inhabit it. Here it is, the biosphere 2. Only input from the sun. They would make everything inside. This is how we would have to live elsewhere. It was a disaster. 8 people became 2 camps of enemies. The air filters got blocked, the fish died, the ants overrun the whole place, the cockroaches took over. It was a disaster. They tried it twice under the best conditions they possibly could. And we're going to go to somewhere else. Well, good news, guys, good news. There is, in the constellation of Centaurus, the closest exoplanet we have found. Oh, sorry, yeah, plan A. Sorry, plan A. That's what we have to do now. Plan B, there isn't a plan B. But good news. There is an exoplanet. This is the closest one to Earth. It's about Earth size. It's got water because it's in that special zone between the sun. Its sun, it can exist as, actual water. And this is it. I reckon, even though it's 25 trillion miles away, right, which means we ain't going to get there anytime soon, but I reckon when we get there, there are little things on there that are going to look a lot like insects. Thank you.